Hi, this is Dr. Randy Hurst. I wasn't sure if I was on or not. Doing these videos that are just basic educational videos to help people understand why it's hard to make changes if somebody decides they're having enough problems with anxiety kinds of problems, threat, fear-based kinds of stress, or addictions, because it's hard to change. And that's the focus of this video, which is change. Is it a decision or is it a skill? Mostly it's hard. When you make a decision to do something that's good for you, that you know you need, do you follow through? Many people don't. It's not long, it's March, so it's the beginning of the new year. There's a lot of resolutions that people make. Or any time of the year, people make a decision that I need to change my diet, I need to change my drinking, I need to change something, my spending. If you do follow through, if you feel good about the changes you make, this probably isn't particularly germane to you. But if you're like the many people who make that decision, I have to change and start but don't follow through, this might be important. One of the things that I read many years ago, I'm going to jump to a slightly different thing, but it fits. William James wrote a book called The Varieties of Religious Experiences, and one of the things that he wrote about was people having these spiritual experiences. And he followed people for months after they reported that they had this just marvelous, epiphanic God experience, and found that a couple of months after what was absolutely a life-changing experience, about 70% of them had slid back into old patterns. That's the challenge. That's why I propose that a decision to change isn't what this is about. It's about many decisions, but really growing a skill to follow through. In the surrender video, I talk about letting go, completely accepting and letting go of the old way and forcing, so to speak, this new way of doing things, which is very hard. Partly because if you've seen the videos about fire together, wire together, the brain has a wired-in pattern that becomes very automatic, which I'll talk about in a little example later, that just deciding doesn't mean it'll be at all easy. The decision is extremely important, but if we go by how we feel, if we go by the wired-in pattern, we'll go back to the old ways, because it isn't easy. It isn't even comfortable. It just doesn't feel right to break the pattern that we've developed, even if we didn't like the pattern, which is bizarre, but it truly is wired into the brain. So here's an example that I've used for many years. I kind of stole it from a guy named Max, who was a supervisor in an inpatient program up in Alaska, where I went to work, and I got the job because he was leaving the job. But he had used this, and I started. I love it. So what he would do is a group of inpatient patients, having lectures and educational stuff, and he'd ask, okay, how many of you realize that you need to quit drinking? All kinds of hands raise up. Okay, how many of you are committed to this idea that you are going to do this? Quite a few hands, most hands raised up. How many of you think it's going to be easy? And now not as many, but some hands raised up. And his next question was, okay, now, what foot do you get out of the shower with? And they look at him like, what? What foot? When you step out of the shower, do you step out with your right foot? Raise your hand. And so some people raise their hands. Okay, the rest of your left foot, right? And you say, okay, for the rest of your time in treatment, next 30 days, I want you to get out of the shower with your other foot first. How many of you think that's going to be easy? All kinds of hands go up. Nobody ever did it. This is the wired-in pattern. Now, it seems inconsequential. What foot do you get out of the shower with? But the thing that is very consequential is that we have many kinds of patterns that are wired in because we've just done them for years. We don't think about them. They're calling, I saw a reference here a couple years ago to this, what I call autopilot, but they call it the default pattern, the default reaction. The brain has these patterns that become so automatically they're the default. They take no thinking. And they happen before you have time to think. So do people always decide to relapse? Often, sometimes they do. But there are situations where it's just an impulse. The opportunity presents itself, they weren't planning it, and boom, it's an impulse to spend that money, pull out the credit card, to eat that when that's against the plan that you've developed, to drink, to use. Many of these things are not that planned. And how do you stop? Step back. Remember what the new thing is that you're doing. Do the new thing so that the new wiring can start to gain some strength against the old wiring. I used to use the metaphor of old records and the groove in the record the needle would go down into. That the wired-in pattern is like a deep groove that the needle has a hard time jumping out of. And our job in changing our lives is to force that needle into going a new groove, new pattern. But the groove is deep enough, it can suck us back in. And if you look at the waves, riding waves to prevent relapse, that it doesn't use that as the metaphor, but it talks about these waves of temptation to fall into the old pattern and how easy it is to have the brain react that way, the gut feelings to react those old ways, and the importance of stepping back and giving yourself a chance to keep that new wiring, ride through those new situations to strengthen the new pattern. So there's a saying that's part of the 12-step community that is, if you do what you always done, you get what you always got. And the focus of the 12-step programs was always doing differently, doing the new you, the becoming you, and not really trusting how you feel. And I grabbed onto that because reading, learning about brain research said that deep emotional gut fast reaction part of the brain is very deep and it can't think. That's why if you go by that gut feeling, that fast reaction, it's so easy to do something that can be problematic, especially if you have an old pattern that isn't good. Stopping, slowing down, taking a deep breath, and intentionally doing this new pattern of yours is what will help you get the new wiring to get stronger. There's some research out that I've seen that, given the years of what I did, I think is half bogus, but I'll bring it up. They talk about 21 days of intentional change can change a habit, can change a pattern. And I would propose for big things, 21 days, yeah, for little things. Look at the racquetball metaphor. I use 30 days in that. But one of the things for big life changes, it takes a lot longer than that because some of these big life changes have been going on for years or decades. And so one of the things that if you know anything about 12-step programs, you'll hear a reference to 90 meetings in 90 days. And I bring that up because it fits the idea of the 21 in that if you follow through consistently, 90 meetings, 90 days, there is less an issue of falling back, relapsing into problems. But is it about 90? And I would propose not really. It's about many of those 90 meetings in 90 days were when you didn't want to do it. When going by your feelings, you absolutely wouldn't do it. But you're pushing through this new pattern, this new behavior. You're making yourself follow through in this new way. Find something that you know you want to be more of and follow through with the idea that really what you're doing is you're deepening that groove in the brain, so to speak. You're strengthening that pattern, that wired-in pattern. But even so, you can have waves that can want to pull you back to the old way. And step back, slow down. Let the thinking, this kind of new part of the brain that has a lot more inhibitory circuits, but really that's part of what's going on in terms of the brain cells, but a lot of it is just the thinking about now versus the future versus what would, if a friend was in my situation, what would I want them to do? Because we can often give good advice that we don't necessarily take ourselves. Well, this is a way of stopping, thinking, and taking the advice you would give a loved one in your situation and trying to do the right thing for the long term. Okay, I hope this makes sense. It is a skill. It does need to be wired in, so keep the new thing happening. It's not about knowledge, it's about doing. Okay, hope this makes sense, and see if there's any more that would be interesting to you.